Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with the growing pressure to recognize systemic racism in Canada and take action to eliminate it, especially in policing. Yesterday, the commissioner of the RCMP said while she believes there's unconscious bias, she can't say for sure if there's systemic racism in the RCMP, and she said she struggles with the definition of it. Today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made it clear what he thinks.
Systemic racism is an issue right across the country in all our institutions, including in all our police forces, including in the RCMP. That's what systemic racism is. So as much as we admire and support the RCMP, we know we need to do better. And it's not just the individual examples we've seen. It's the issues faced by Canadians of diverse backgrounds over years, decades, and generations.
Trudeau says he does still have confidence in the RCMP commissioner. And beyond police reform, there are calls to rethink who we choose to honor from our past. In Vancouver this morning, the statue of British explorer Captain George Vancouver was found covered in paint. Similar scenes are playing out in cities around the world. Monuments to men who were once honored, now viewed by a new generation as symbols of racism and colonialism, relics of the past not standing the test of time. In some cases, city officials are taking them down themselves because of the public pressure. Here in Canada, a push is underway to take a harder look at historical names attached to our schools and our streets. One is Henry Dundas. He was a big political figure from Scotland in the 19th century. Tonight, Eric Sorensen looks at the campaign to wipe his name from signs all over Ontario, including in Canada's biggest city.
As protesters marched through Toronto's iconic Young Dundas Square last week, few probably realized that Dundas Street is a name now being scrutinized over Canada's history on race.
Do you know where the name Dundas Street comes from?
Actually, no, I'm not sure.
That person was Henry Dundas, Britain's Lord of the Admiralty more than 200 years ago. And when Toronto was being designed, a major street was named for him. But Henry Dundas also blocked Britain's abolition of slavery for 15 years. And that, say critics, is not a legacy Toronto should embrace by having the name Dundas emblazoned on street corners all over the city.
They preserve the sense that there is something legitimate. Why would you want to identify with someone who opposed the abolition of slavery? Why would that be meaningful for anyone?
Dundas is not just a major street name in Toronto. As you go west, it just keeps going. So other communities are also confronting the history of the name Dundas.
Dundas Street carries on from Toronto through Mississauga and several more communities in southern Ontario all the way to London. In Hamilton, a community called Dundas still exists. In Woodstock, Dundas was a main street a century ago, and it still is today. And in London, Ontario, a major artery right through downtown. And its history there is also now being questioned.
Right now, we're having a conversation about something that is very important, not only to a group of racialized community members, but as far as the nation is concerned. And I think this is where we're going to start to get some healing and understanding.
Canada is not alone examining Henry Dundas. Some in Scotland want an enormous statue of the man taken down. Across Canada, many historic figures and symbols are now being viewed through the lens of racism.
I believe in examining our history, criticizing it. Slavery existed in Canada. It existed in New France. We can't deny it. We can't escape from it.
In Toronto, thousands have petitioned to rename Dundas Street. No easy feat.
Renaming a major street or public space does create many practical challenges, but we should have a process that can examine what are very important and relevant historical questions.
In southern Ontario, millions are familiar with the name Dundas. Is it time to expunge or at least diminish its prominence in our midst? Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
That anger is about past injustices, but it's fueled by what's still happening today. Another video has been released in the United States showing the arrest of a black man. It's police body cam footage from Oklahoma City, and a warning, it is disturbing to watch. Police say 42-year-old Derek Scott was confronted after they received reports a man was brandishing a gun.
Okay. I don't care.
Keep your hands behind your back!
Well, pinned to the ground, Scott says multiple times, "I can't breathe." One officer says, "I don't care." One had her knee between his shoulder blades, another straddled his back for about 13 minutes.
I can't breathe. I can't breathe, please. Help, please.
He died shortly after his arrest. The video was released by police after Scott's family and a local Black Lives Matter group demanded more details. The officers have been cleared of any wrongdoing. Black activists are demanding it stop, demanding that black boys should not have to grow up wondering if they might be next. As Jackson Proskow reports, that's going to take leadership and a willingness to change, and there are no signs of that coming from the White House.
The reckoning has come to every corner of America. A statue of Christopher Columbus toppled in Minneapolis. Confederate monuments ripped down in Virginia. The Confederate flag banned from all NASCAR events. And in Washington, a push to take down monuments inside the Capitol and to rename U.S. military bases named for Confederate generals. Through this national upheaval, President Donald Trump remains steadfastly on the opposite side, vowing to not even consider renaming bases, in the past objecting to the removal of monuments.
And then you have the president make a case as to why a base should be named for them. He seems to be the only person left who doesn't get it.
Trump has largely projected silence, even as those around him break theirs.
It was a mistake that I've learned from.
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff issued a public apology for appearing alongside the president after protesters were forcibly cleared from outside the White House to make way for a photo op last week.
I should not have been there. My presence in that moment and in that environment created a perception of the military involved in domestic politics.
Meanwhile, Trump himself has failed to address the issues of race that sparked the protests. His first scheduled campaign event in months is mired in racial overtones. Trump will speak to supporters in Tulsa, Oklahoma, site of one of the worst race massacres in U.S. history, on the day known as Juneteenth, which commemorates the end of slavery.
It's a slap in the face. I think it's a total insult to the black community and to the city of Tulsa for him to choose Juneteenth to come and kick off his campaign.
That's unlikely to slow down a nation on the march toward change. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.